Good evening, everyone. Warm welcome for today's session. Welcome to this session of on digital system navigation conservation. And I'm so excited for tonight. I think technology every time brings innovation and creativity within the room. So I can't wait to see what is happening in conservation with tech. My name is Diane Mumararungu, and I'm going to be your host tonight. So tonight's session is going to be exploring how technology is shaping conservation. Technology continues to transform the way we protect and understand our planet. It's being incorporated in different aspects of the world and different areas of our life. And this series is going to specifically be highlighting some of the tools shaping conservation, from GPS use, sensors, and GIS mapping to smart system and software system like Earth Ranger app. And in the room, we have two amazing speakers, Mr. Peter Hamming and Jean-Pierre Fier-Lyon, who are going to be taking us through and updating us how digital system is being used in conservation. Specifically, to start, we are going to have our first speaker is going to be Mr. Peter Hamming, and these are the key learning outcomes out of his presentation. The first one, he's going to be focusing on the path of data, and the first key learning outcome is to apply structured approach to the collection and storage of data, recognize different platforms often used by conservation organizations for structured data correction and management, identify technologies used for automated data correction, and lastly, understanding the basic capacities for Earth Ranger and how its data can be displayed. Our first speaker, if I can briefly tell you his bio, Mr. Peter Hamming is a conservation biologist with international experience from Netherlands and the US and South Africa. Since joining the Southern African Wildlife College in 2018, he has been instrumental in implementing smart conservation software across Africa and developing capacity building strategies for its use. He's guided by his motto, which is very interesting. His motto is "Conservation starts at home." And I think you do agree with me, this is a really interesting motto we can learn from him. Mr. Peter is also passionate about using technology and research to drive impactful conservation action. So without further ado, Mr. Peter, we are so delighted to have you with us in the room. The floor is yours.
Diane, sorry to interrupt, but I don't see Peter on the screen anymore. Am I wrong?
Okay. He had mentioned about the power cut that it's going to be back within seconds. But if that is the case, I will ask Jean-Pierre to go ahead with the presentation. That way, we manage our time in the best interest. JP, are you okay to go first?
Yeah, all good my side.
Yes. So let me briefly introduce you, then you can share your screen, and then we start.
Grand.
So we're going to have our speaker, who is, like I mentioned, is Jean-Pierre Fier-Lyon, but is better known as JP. I think you agree with me to allow me to use that name.
Absolutely.
He is the Area Integrity Manager at La Parara Wilderness, where he leads efforts to strengthen field operation and wildlife protection. He has a background in canine training and poaching and security management. JP brings a wealth of hands-on experience in safeguarding wildlife and protected areas. And without further ado, please join me as we welcome JP. The floor is yours.
And thank you to all the listeners that are here tonight. And thank you to Share Screen Africa for giving us opportunity to present and hopefully make an impact on the young minds going forward that are going to carry the torch of conservation going forward. So saying that, as my bio suggested, I am the Area Integrity Manager at La Palala Wilderness. Essentially, that makes me responsible for the strategic development and implementation of our area integrity strategy, or otherwise known as security plan. Obviously, at La Palala, we have a number of endangered species. that require intensive protection. I've got more than a decade's experience in the industry at an operational level and a management level on a strategic front, implementing these technologies in the field. So please keep any questions that you guys may have, and we'd be more than happy to share my insight on particular questions. So saying that, just a brief overview of technology and conservation. Some of the key functions that we utilize technology for is monitoring. So this means real-time tracking of wildlife patrols and environmental conditions, as well as detection, i.e. early warning systems for poaching, fire, or ecosystem disturbances, as well as for analysis through data collection and AI-assisted interpretation to identify trends and threats. And obviously communication, allowing field teams to share data back with our operations room or our command centers, and documentation, creating digital records of all incidents, patrols, biodiversities, operations, etc. So some of the key tools and systems that we utilize are EarthRanger and Seymour. EarthRanger and Seymour are centralized platforms for incident and patrol data management. They are what we consider a situational awareness application, that we can see everything that's going on in our protected area on one screen in one place. We also utilize drones quite extensively. That's a more recent development in the space, but we are really leveraging drones and their efficiency to provide real-time monitoring in inaccessible areas, as well as camera traps. Camera traps automate wildlife and threat detection for us and also allow for identification and classification of certain species. We utilize GPS tracking collars to monitor the movement of high-value or endangered species, as well as monitoring of post-release after introductions. So at Lapalala, we reintroduce certain animals from time to time, and utilizing GPS tracking collars really allows us to monitor those animals. We also leverage LoRaWAN sensors. Obviously, in a rural or rugged environment like we have here in the Waterberg, certain or cell phone signal is very limited. So we have to leverage certain technologies for communication, and LoRaWAN being one of those. So LoRaWAN is a communication system, if you'd like to call it that allows in-field sensors to send data back to our centralized platforms, i.e. EarthRanger or Seymour, to be able to track things such as vehicles, fences, water levels, environmental conditions, and more. We also use AI for image recognition. AI image recognition really allows us to really work large batches of data to identify whether it's particular species, whether it's particular people or vehicles, etc. And that is able to use varied different data sources, whether that's camera traps, drones, or just normal footage, etc. So when it comes to technology and conservation, obviously conservation is got a lot to do with biodiversity and wildlife. And wildlife requires monitoring and research to better understand those different species. So with regards to GPS and satellite tracking, we utilize collars and tags to track animal movements, migrations, and behavior. We also set up geofences and proximity alerts so that we get automated alerts when certain animals cross certain thresholds, whether that be a fence line or whether that be proximity to a human settlement, etc. As well as using camera traps and acoustic sensors. We don't use acoustic sensors just as yet. It's a project that we're looking into, but we utilize camera traps at the moment to collect data on elusive species without human disturbance, as well as using AI and machine learning to process large amount of field data, i.e. camera trap data. So some of the camera traps send photos to a server, and those servers will then have built-in AI that can process that and detect certain species or if there's a human threat, etc. As well as then you can manually download and batch upload data from not smart cameras, if I can put it that way. Cameras that have a normal SD card and collect photos over time. So here on my screen, there's some examples. So to the far right of my screen, we'll see a big map with a bunch of different animal icons. Those are some of the different animals that are collared with inside Lapalala. So we've got some lions and cheetahs, hyenas, elephants, buffalo, wild dog, etc. So by tracking these animals, we're able to to monitor them and their spatial utilization of the reserve. In the middle of the screen, we see an example of a leopard research. Leopards are really elusive in the Waterberg. The Waterberg comes from, in the last couple of decades, there's a lot of agricultural farming happening in the Waterberg, and leopards were persecuted due to their human-wildlife conflict, where they were catching livestock, etc. So the leopards in our area are very scared of humans and skittish, so it's very difficult to get close to them from a monitoring perspective. As well as leopards are largely free roaming, they don't respect fences. They jump over fences and go as they please. So it's very difficult for us to put collars on them. So we utilize camera traps to be able to detect these different leopards in different areas. And then through the image, we're able to identify that particular individuals within that species so that we can then count how many different leopards do we have on Lapalala. And just an interesting fact, through our leopard research project, we identified over 35 leopards that frequent our area, of which we probably only see 2 of those individuals on a regular basis in person. And then on the far left of my screen, we've got another map of Lapalala with some spatial data on it. Those are 3 different male lion collars. So we'll see in the bottom of that image, we've got the sort of light blue and then the sort of pink different spatial data, those lines. That is the tracking for those lions and their utilization of the reserve. So what's really interesting to see is we see those 2 different males down in the south. They have much smaller areas, but they are the more dominant lions. They do not go into each other's territories, but they have what we consider sweet veld. So those are really productive areas where there's a lot of plains game, etc., prey for them. Whereas we see the males up in the north, the yellow ones, those are younger males that are not very dominant. So they have a much bigger home range, but it's much less prey for them in those areas. It's not as dense population. So that just gets you to understand some of the social dynamics of that lion population. Moving on from that, another part of biodiversity is obviously habitat and ecosystem management. So utilizing GIS and remote sensing to map ecosystems, track vegetation changes, analyze vegetation cover, and detect fires. So a really rudimentary way of doing this for everyone listening, just for interest's sake, is if you go onto Google Earth, you can then select different years worth of satellite imagery. So you can play with what did the area look like last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. Depending on the particular area, there'll be a certain amount of data freely available. And then one can really get to understand either bush encroachment, habitat loss, cities that are getting bigger, and that kind of stuff to really get an understanding of the area that you're working in. As well as to understand vegetation changes. So at Lapalala, because it comes from some of the areas, the properties that we purchased over were agricultural farms, we've had to do bush rehabilitation. And one of the ways that we can measure our impact is year-on-year satellite imagery. Another really interesting technology that is really adding a lot of value for us is climate and weather sensors. So these provide data on rainfall, temperature, and drought conditions, which informs habitat management, as well as fire detection. So satellite imagery is used these days to detect fires, which improves our response to mitigate risk of a runaway fire, as well as monitoring of those fires. Certain amount of fires in a protected area are required. The bush does go through a natural cycle of burning. So this allows us to monitor and collect data on those fires so we can know, should we intervene or should we let the fire take its course, or do we need to have planned burning from time to time? So on my screen, we'll see 3 examples of some of this data. To the top right, we'll see the rain per month at Lapalala. What's really interesting to note is that we can see the rain really spikes in December. We normally get our first little bit of rain in October. November is not generally a good month, but then December we really spike in rain. So that gives the ecologist data to work with to understand the average rainfall, as well as when that road is coming. As well as from an infrastructure point of view, our infrastructure and roads department is able to better plan their work around the wet seasons, etc., having accurate predictions. Just below that is the wind, just another interesting metric that is collected, showing us the different wind conditions throughout the year from spring, summer, and winter. And then to the far left, we've got the AFIS application or dashboard, which shows us all of the active fires as of yesterday. So this yesterday from the date of the creation of this presentation, but one is then able to get notifications to say, is there a wildfire that has flared up somewhere that's close to your reserve, etc. Moving on to my area of expertise with regards to security and anti-poaching. The philosophy that we implement at Lapalala is to deter, detect, and detain. So we want to deter wildlife crimes, i.e. poaching. If there is wildlife crimes, we want to be able to detect it. And once detected, we want to be able to detain those individuals to be able to hand them over to law enforcement for the judicial process to take its course. So some of the solutions, there's two main sort of categories of solutions, if we can put it that way, is internal solutions and perimeter monitoring. So internal, that'll be all of your technology that you deploy within the protected area. And those technologies are technologies such as wide area detection, systems like radar systems, thermal capabilities, so thermal cameras that can cover large areas of ground and detect thermal abnormalities, as well as abnormality detection, metal detection, and integrity testing. Then from a perimeter side, one can leverage fence monitoring, long-range cameras, CCTV cameras, license plate reading cameras, and access control systems. So on my screen over here on the far right, we've got an example of a fence alert from our Earth Ranger. And this fence alert was for a particular Makokobela section of fence, and the fence voltage was low. And the last voltage was at 5.8 kV. We should be at 8 to 10 kV on average during this time of day. So we knew that there was a problem with this particular fence line. We are then able to send out a team to go and address that fence and why its voltage is low. In the center bottom of the screen, we've got an example of a camera trap that's placed next to a road. And that camera was triggered by motion. It then sent that photo through to the server. And from the server, it was able to leverage AI to decipher what is in that photo. And as we can see by the red blocks around the vehicle and the two individuals in the back, it detected a human threat. One being the vehicle, and then obviously the two humans at the back. So that's real time. That happens, there's less than a couple of, a minute delay depending on signal. But that's real time that you're getting those alerts in your operations room and then able to act on them. And then just on the left, we've got one of our drone pilots that were flying a drone inside a vehicle, leveraging a large screen for enhanced awareness. What's also really important in area integrity or security operations is to have a night capability. So as human beings, biologically, we are not designed or evolved to operate at night. We are a diurnal species. Thus, we're able to use technology and leverage technology to expand our night capability through the likes of thermal drones, giving us an overwatch in the sky at night when your average helicopter cannot fly. A helicopter needs to be night rated, the pilot needs to be night rated, etc., for it to be able to operate at night, which not a lot of protected areas have access to that. So by leveraging a technology of drones, you're able to get eyes in the sky at night at a very minimal cost if you compare it to a helicopter. That as shown by the image to the left, and then the top right image, that is the guys operating at night with night vision. So we can see how dark it is by the photo. It's a bright moon night, so it's actually quite illuminated. However, for us to be able to operate comfortably and mitigate risk at night, we leverage certain technologies that allow us to operate more freely at night with reduced risk. And the photo just to the bottom of that is another one of our drone pilots flying the said drone. From a security perspective, if we look at a strategy, a layered strategy working from the outside in, at Lapalala, the rhinos are our greatest risk animal from a wildlife crime perspective from poaching. So that, if we look at it from purely from a security management perspective, we would consider the rhino the asset, and then we would want to protect the asset. Everything else are layers of security, but protecting the actual asset is the crux of it all at the end of the day. So at Lapalala, we leverage AI foot collars in conjunction with drones. And these foot collars have got built-in processors and onboard AI that utilize a number of different sensors that collect data on the animal's movement and behavior, And then that AI that is on board is able to detect abnormalities. So stuff like high stress situations where the animal is running, where the animal falls over, where the animal is in fights, natural events such as calving, mortalities, etc., as well as obviously being shot by a poacher. So these alerts come through real time. They are run through a LoRaWAN system. So to the top left, we can see a nice big white rhino bull that was immobilized and a foot collar was attached to him. There in the middle of that is said foot collar, just a close-up on the rhino. And then to the right, we've got a map of Earth Ranger showing us our different rhino locations, etc. I'm going to play 2 short videos. The one to the bottom left, the first video that's going to play is that of a black rhino after we had received an alert for an abnormal behavior. It said a rhino got scared off by other animals and ran off. That generated an alert. And then the next video will be that of white rhinos that were on top of a mountain that slipped on some rocks and then generated an alert. So what these 2 videos are really there to showcase is the integration of systems, both the drones and the AI collars. So from an impact perspective, or when you deploy an intervention like a foot collar, you don't always want to be intervening because you'll start to disturb natural behaviors such as fighting for dominance or mating or calving, etc. So we leverage the drones to go in to not disturb the animal so that we can get an aerial image of the animal to see if the animal is in good health or if there's any area of concern. If not, then we can wait for the animal to naturally move off and then follow up by foot. As well as then, if an animal is in an inaccessible area, we can leverage the drone to go into that area much more efficiently and quicker than a human being or foot patrol. So on the video, we can see that particular black rhino's name is Metsi, and he is just moseying off. So from the drone's image, which is very clear, I'm not sure if it's coming across clear over the stream, but it's from my side, it's extremely clear. We can see if there's any injuries, if there's any behavioral changes, and the general attitude of the animal. In this video, we can see this rhino is very relaxed. His tail is nice and neutral, and he's moving very freely and in a relaxed manner. The next video is that of the white rhino, and this is also showcasing the zoom capabilities on the particular drone. We can zoom in really, really far and get a really good image of the animals without disturbing them. So again, if we saw in the beginning of that footage, it was quite a mountain to climb. It would have taken rangers over an hour to get to those animals. It took the drone 2.5 minutes. So with all of this technology that's been mentioned, one needs a central area or platform or room for all of this data to come into. At Lapalala, we employ an operations and monitoring room, which live views all of our situational awareness programs. They receive alerts from various technology sources and initiates and coordinates responses. So on the bottom left, we can see an example of my operations room in action with one of my ops rooms operators busy on the radio. So we can see there's quite a few screens in that room. But that's just for us to be able to visualize all the different data feeds that are coming in real time. To the top right of the screen, we can see our Earth Ranger dashboard with some of the different heat maps from different patrolling teams over a set period of time. This allows us to monitor and manage our patrols very effectively because we can see what areas have they covered, what areas have they not covered, etc. As well as then Seymour at the bottom. It's a South African program. It's very much the same as Earth Ranger, just designed slightly different. We utilize both of them. We use Earth Ranger a lot more for our biodiversity and ecology and reserve management. And then Seymour, we use that specifically for the protection forces management and incident management and data collection. One of the important considerations of technology is connectivity. Without connectivity, technology is pretty useless. Technology needs to communicate, and to communicate, one requires connectivity. So there's a couple of main protocols or methods of connectivity. One being GSM, i.e. cellular cell phone signal, which in our area we utilize for camera traps, Earth Ranger updates, and mobile apps. We've also got VHF radios, your normal radios, your walkie-talkies, which we utilize for voice communications, ranger coordination, as well as ranger tracking. We utilize the radios as a fail-safe radio tracking system, so that if they don't have cell phone signal, or if the LoRaWAN system goes down, we are still able to track our ranger patrols through their radios. We also use Wi-Fi and wireless LAN networks. These are used to link high data systems with base stations. So stuff like thermal cameras, certain systems like radars, etc., that one can then, that needs a high data throughput, you can use a Wi-Fi or wireless LAN setup. As well as then obviously LoRaWAN, which stands for low power, long range, which we utilize for animal collars, fence monitoring, and weather stations. As well as satellite links. So satellite links allow us to have high bandwidth data connections in field where there's no cell phone signal, through the likes of systems like Starlink as one example, and some others. On screen, the example to the left, that's a LoRaWAN gateway. So that's a repeater site or a cell phone tower in layman terms, which we then deploy into the field, which is then able to collect all of that data from the different tracking devices, fence monitors, etc., and then send that through to the cloud-based server. And then to the right, we've got a wireless LAN link site that is highly mobile. So the big thing in the world at the moment, and as much in the conservation space, is artificial intelligence, and specifically in conservation technology. So AI is redefining how conservation data is analyzed, interpreted, and acted upon. It transforms raw data from cameras, sensors, and trackers into actionable intelligence for wildlife protection and ecosystem management. So some of the key applications are for automated image recognition. It can, through photos, identify species, people, vehicles, through camera traps, drone, or surveillance footage, which reduces manual analysis time and increasing accuracy. So an example of this, the camera traps at La Palala Wilderness, in a particular period of time, which was less than a year, we had 50,000 photos taken, 50,000, by our camera traps, of which only 5,000 actually had either an animal or a person in them. So that's a 10% hit ratio on a camera trap. And through the AI, we were able to reduce the amount of human hours in reviewing those photos, because the AI does that for us and only sends through that either has got an animal or human in it. As well as behavioral analytics. So, for example, the foot collars on the rhinos, if there are certain stress patterns or triggers, we are able then to get early warnings in our operations room that there may be a problem with a rhino, that we can intervene if required, or if there's a potential poaching incident, that we can respond. It can also be leveraged for predictive modeling, so forecasting poaching risks, mitigation paths, and habit use using historical and live data. Acoustic monitoring, utilizing AI to recognize gunshots, chainsaws, animal calls, etc. And environmental pattern analysis. So integrating weather, terrain, and sensor data to identify correlations affecting wildlife and resource use. So with all of this technology, it can be quite overwhelming to try and decide what technology needs to be deployed in a particular area. But there is a strategic approach to systems design. Systems design is quite a complex subject that requires a lot of thought and understanding of different concepts, etc. But in a nutshell, one needs to define your operational needs. If you want to deploy a technology, you need to know what your needs are first. So identifying your objectives. Is it for wildlife monitoring? Is it for anti-poaching? Is it ecological data collection? Is it for tourism? Is it for biodiversity? Really understanding your needs. Then understanding and mapping user requirements. So, for example, the field rangers that will be using the technology, the operations room, the managers and the researchers, how will they be interacting with that technology so that you can best design your system around that? Prioritizing issues to be solved before selecting a technology. Assessing the environment. In rural and protected areas and remote areas, environment plays a very big role. So evaluating your terrain because of requirements such as connectivity through GSM, LoRa, VHF, wireless LAN, and accessibility. It doesn't help you decide to put a cell phone or a LoRaWAN tower up on a mountain if you can't get there. Hopefully you have the funds to be able to bring a helicopter in and just drop it on the mountain, but generally that's not as feasible. As well as certain climate or vegetation. So deploying certain sensors in certain areas, if you're in a forested environment, there's a lot of technology that doesn't work because of how thick the vegetation is. One then needs to design the integrated systems approach. So is there interoperability between this technology and the systems that you'll be using? Can it send its data to EarthRanger, CMOR, or SMART, or CyberTracker, etc.? Can the technology that is collecting the data, can that data be viewed on your drones? Can the sensors, vet, blue on blue, etc.? Building a layered architecture. So understanding the process flow from sensor to communication to the data platform to the decision making, as well as standardizing data formats and communication protocols. What often happens is everyone goes on their own mission, and there's no standardization of data and the data flow. And if you have different data, your job just becomes so much more difficult putting that data into the same format so that you can actually use it for decision making. Then implementing it in a scaled approach. One should always begin with pilot projects or proof of concepts on a smaller scale to identify some of the key lessons and teething problems early on so that you can take that into account for the full rollout. You need to prioritize low power, cost effective and maintainable technologies. In remote rural areas, accessibility is often challenging and power is not available. There is no power lines running through Lapalala. We are very fortunate, but that means that we need to utilize stuff like solar. Ensuring local capacity building and staff training. You can deploy whichever technology you want, but if you're not training your staff on how to use it, it's not going to be effective. And then finally is monitor, evaluate, and evolve. One needs to establish key performance indicators for this technology effectiveness, conduct regular reviews, maintenance, and upgrades, and foster feedback loops between users and system designers to refine efficiency. So I think in a nutshell, one needs to really understand the operational needs or the objectives. You need to assess your environment and your system and implement in a scaled approach. And then finally, and most important, is monitor and evaluate. And then utilize that feedback to improve the system going forward. So on to the last slide of my presentation, just to touch back on one of the first slides. The impact of conservation technology. So the operational benefits that we receive is enhanced protection by means of early warning and detection of threats. For example, poachers or fence breaches, etc. Improved efficiency. So data-driven patrols and resource allocation. We can utilize the data that is collected through our Rhino tracking to better plan our patrols and risk areas. Accountability. Digital records of patrols and incidents and interventions allow for accountability. There's no more, my dog ate my homework. It's all online. It's kind of hard to eat homework if it's online. So if you have a full record of all the different patrols, incidents, and interventions, one can then really understand where the accountability lies if something didn't work out. And collaboration. One of the more important things of going into the modern world and the new age or the information technology age is that we're able to share this information much more freely. Back in the day, we had to share a diary or a book to a neighboring reserve to share data or publish an article, whereas these days one can share data quite freely through online platforms. And to end it off, and all things being equal, one must remember that technology does not replace rangers. It empowers them. Without the rangers on the ground, you've got no one to action the data that is collected from technology. And another quick one is artificial intelligence remains artificial. It needs to be used in conjunction with real intelligence. You can't let AI do all the work with no human input. It's never going to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JP.
Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really a wonderful talk and very insightful. I think I learned quite a lot as an individual, and I believe the audience would agree with me. And we wanted to look at the key learning outcomes before I even welcome the questions, before we move on to the next speaker. So these were the key learning outcomes we're looking at in the presentation of JP, the overview of operation technology in biodiversity conservation. And I think he pretty much gave us some of the technology they use in their daily operations. He explained it in details. And secondly, he also tackled on the overview of operation technology in area integrity and anti-poaching, and the use of AI and its use in conservation. And lastly, he also talked on the introduction of some of the strategy system designs. These were both on the last two slides that he mentioned. And moving on to the questions, I can see in the chat box there's no questions, but I think JP will allow me to have the privilege to ask my first question. I wanted to ask about if there is any AI adoption, but I think you tackled it, mentioning that that you use it in image capturing and verification of its accuracy. But I was wondering, from the adoption of technology at La Parara, how has it helped you to overcome some of the challenges that you had previously that you have been facing? Do you see any good? I think definitely there's some good, but from your perspective at La Parara, what's the good have you seen in technology, and how do you see it could be better adopted even in other conservancy area?
So I think, first and foremost, we've seen a dramatic increase in efficiency in the reserve. So obviously, as a protected area, we've got a management plan that we need to deliver on in terms of, conserving the area, increasing biodiversity, and some of the other KPIs. But leveraging technology has created efficiency because we can see what's going on real time. Historically, we had to wait for a patrol debrief, for example, for the rangers to tell us where they have been and where they have not been. Whereas through technology, we can track that ranger team real time and see exactly where they are, where they've been, and where they haven't been. So that also creates a large amount of accountability, so that we know that we can see where the guys have been and haven't been. So there's no room for, stretching of the truth, for example. As well as then from a more biodiversity perspective, is one of the really big ones is the camera trap projects, where we can identify species that we hadn't seen in person because of their elusiveness, and that they are not seen, and they are nocturnal species, for example, and so forth. But one of the more recent and influential implementations of technology in Lapalala were the rhino foot collars. And that happened in the last couple of years after a poaching incident at Lapalala, which we were unable to detect immediately, and we detected it a number of hours later. And through that, we really came to realize that we needed something on the actual rhino as a not an early warning, but an immediate detection technology. And through the deployment of that technology, it's we haven't had an incident since we deployed that, because obviously of the psychological impact on a potential poacher, knowing that the animal is tracked and that there's a collar on it. But also being able to increase our efficiency of patrols by patrolling in the right areas, because we know exactly where the clusters of rhinos are and where the centers of gravity are, and so forth.
And I want to ask also another question on behalf of Wildlife Tourism College students. So as for beginners, I think, like you mentioned, all the tools and systems really need someone to have like some beginning knowledge on how to use it. So like someone who's coming straight away from school, what would you advise them on some of the tools they can probably start to familiarize themselves while they're still in schools? We are talking about the students who are studying wildlife management. Definitely, once they go into the workspace, they'll start to be exposed to this information. But again, what can they do? What are some of the systems or apps they could familiarize with them? Like Earth Range, I know the app, it could be maneuvered around, someone can study it and how it is being used and how they can do some data correction from it. What guidance would you give them? That way, when they go to work, it's not like they're seeing something for the first time.
So I think, you know, in the 21st century is just really having a good computer literacy. So obviously technology revolves around, you know, the utilization of computers. So really the first and foremost is just having good computer literacy. But then, you know, to more specific programs and applications, I think the likes of Earth Ranger is vital. It's being used all over the, you know, conservation landscape, all over the continent. And really getting to understand that and how it can be leveraged and utilized to collect in-field data through both field reports as well as automated sensors and data collection. And then other applications, you know, one that helps me to this day is Google Earth. It's quite a rudimentary. I'm not an ecologist, so I don't work with, you know, ArcGIS and those kind of programs. I use with Google Earth, and that really gives one an introduction to satellite imagery and planning and mapping and stuff like that. So that would be an example that I would say for someone that's still now learning and in teaching and so forth, is really try and get yourself familiarized with the Google Earth, that one can start to understand what does satellite imagery look like, you know, from the image compared to on the ground. And then, you know, is just keep, you know, on top of the upcoming technologies. You know, most of the actual applications, they're very site specific or project specific. But from our side, you know, we use different programs and applications throughout, but those are largely more, you know, restrictive in terms of their footprint. So one of the technologies that we use through to license plate cameras, that uses a particular system that's only available, you know, in South Africa, for example. But I think some of the basic computer literacy and satellite imagery and so forth. And then getting to understand camera traps. I think camera traps are very, very useful out in the field. Because, you know, if you put a camera trap out opposed to a researcher, that camera trap, it works 24 hours, it works at day, it works at night, it never sleeps, it never gets hungry, it just works. Whereas as having, you know, boots in the ground, that you need to do a lot more planning, staff rotation, and. So camera traps are a really useful tool.
And a quick question was from also Sharon, who asked about camera traps. I know you just talked about them, and she was asking about, do drones work more effectively than camera traps? And
Cool. I see the chat. I'm going to answer those three questions one after another, just in effort to try and save some time for the next speaker. So for the first question, do camera traps work more effectively? Do drones work more effectively than camera traps? So we utilize them for very different reasons. Camera traps stay out in the field and they collect data slowly over time. Whereas drones, we utilize them on a response basis. We obviously also do proactive patrolling with drones from a security perspective. However, drones really need intelligence to be able to go into a particular area to be able to find something. Using a drone to find something is like finding a needle in a haystack, unless you know which haystack it is and which section of the haystack it is. So really, it's for two different uses, and they both do their own thing better. So camera traps collect data over a long time much better than drones, whereas drones work much better in being able to follow an animal, for example, or follow a poacher. The next question was, what are the main challenges to adopting conservation in technology areas? Communication and connectivity. If you don't have good signal, cellular signal, then you need to have other technologies, satellite, LoRaWAN, radio, etc. And then obviously also just the skills base. A lot of protected areas are in rural environments, and in rural environments, technology adoption is a bit slower. So really understanding your workforce and upskilling your workforce to be able to utilize these technologies properly. Another question in terms of cost saving and adding AI applications to save your time and increase accuracy, were you able to find free low cost applications? So fortunately in the conservation space, there's a lot of great organizations that develop these AI and these technologies for free. Earth Ranger, you know, is for free for a protected area. The AI that we utilize for our camera traps through Wildlife Protection Services It's also a non-profit organization, so that's for free. So there hasn't been any added cost in that specific sense. The AI foot collars on the rhinos, that's a built-in technology. It did add a layer of cost, but there was a really strong reason behind adding that layer of cost. And then why is it important to map user requirements before selecting a technology? Because if you don't know what your requirements are, you can't select the right technology. So if you don't know to utilize a field detection or a field-based technology where a person is collecting the data, or is it an automated sensor, for example? But to answer your question, one would need to understand what your objectives are behind the technology. Then I'll be able to ask your question. So it needs to start at that point, understanding the objectives behind the technology, and then you'd be able to map out the user requirements for a particular technology. I thank everyone.
Yes, thank you, JP. And thank you, JP. That was well addressed questions. And let's move on to the presentation of Peter. That way, if you have any further question, we get to ask after this next presentation from Peter Hamming. Peter, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody, and yeah, thanks a lot for having me tonight. JP spoke a lot about Earth Ranger, and what we'll look at is before Earth Ranger. So what is the importance about data? How should we understand data and the movement thereof? So in short, just the path of data. What I wanted to show you at first is if you look at this, you'll see a map. And what do all of these have in common? So if we look at this one, we've got another one that looks at home ranges. And then we've got one that's got a table. So let's just quickly go back to the first one. This first one has got data. And if we look, what they've all got in common is data. So first of all, we've got some lines on this map that we had to collect with a GPS. We've got these dots, which are showing where the fire extinguishers are. And then we've got a whole system in the background to show if these fire extinguishers are still ready to use or do we need to replace them. Here, if you look at this map here, it's also color data that has been used. So in these green areas, you can say the animals were there for most of the time. These red areas, the animals were there for less than 50% of the time. And now you can ask yourself certain questions and say, why is this? It could be that there is a dam here, or maybe there's a mountain. So there's various reasons that you need to understand when you get this data from all these different sensors. This last one is not GIS at all. These are merely the number of birds and then the year that they were seen in. So I like ringing birds, so I catch them, survey them for biology, and then every year you can see how many birds were caught. Now the nice thing to see here, I caught the most birds in 2021. And this was the year when we had COVID. And most of us had more time than we've got today. And you see 2022, we were running back to reality of work and being in a class. So we already said all of these graphs and images has got data as the driver. Now, what we've seen, and JP spoke about it at the end, is before you start creating any graph, or before you start looking at graphs and maps and technologies, you must remember to have the end in mind. What do I want? What is my question that I want to answer? Is it to protect the rhino? Is it to see where the elephants are moving? Is it to see how many times the gate closes and opens? This will then determine which technology and software you'll be able to use. And then in data collection, and we'll look a little bit more at this, you need to be consistent. If I say I've got a lot of something, I've got a lot of food in my cupboard. If you're a person that's not a big eater, or I've got a lot of sweets in my cupboard, it might be one person with a packet of Smarties. That's a lot for that person. For the other person, he really wants a box full of sweets. So this terminologies are very important, that we all have the same terminology, that when we say a lot, everybody knows what it means. Where can you get your data from? And you've already seen there's quite a few different sources. So here we've got a ranger. You as a person is a source of data. Then we've got a GPS. We've got drones, where you can use AI to identify animals on the ground. Now, in this picture, this was done afterwards. So you fly the drone and then afterwards you can see where the animals are. Today, in the newest drones, while you are flying, you can identify certain features on the ground. Some of the older technology was these VHF tags, where you could follow the animal, but you had to use telemetry. And then in the newer technologies, you can use the IoT or satellite tracking, and then put these big collars around animals' necks. Now, when collecting with a GPS, there are a few settings you can use. If we look carefully at this one, you can see there is degrees, minutes, and then there's a decimal. So this GPS here is set in degrees, minutes, and decimal minutes. Sometimes when you use a map, you'll see degrees, minutes, and seconds, because there's 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in a degree. And what is also important, when you go out and you collect data with a GPS or with your cell phone, you need to let your phone soak a little bit. So GPS soaking, you switch your GPS on, and then you wait for it to connect with these satellites. The more satellites it connects with, the better it can give you the exact point where you are on Earth. So the way that we like to present GPS coordinates, especially when you are collecting data into Excel, is in degrees and decimal degrees. Because within a computer or within your Excel, it is just a lot easier to work with than to write something like here, degrees and minutes. A computer doesn't understand this, and it will be difficult for you to find it. Right, now you're using this device, GPS. You do not have Earth Ranger, so you need to use your cell phone, your GPS. You download it onto your computer and you put it somewhere. Or what we can do is we collect all our data, we put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and we store it on our computer. There is a risk to this. And the risk is, here is an example. I've put a list, like an Excel spreadsheet, of students that are coming to colleges. Each person, each lecturer wrote their own description of how they would write the college's name. One person would say Wildlife Tourism College. The next person would maybe just say WTC Mara. Then in our case, it is the Southern African Wildlife College, or SAWC. So how many students or how many colleges are here? If we look at this data, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different colleges. And this is because we are not careful how we collect our data. And it doesn't matter what platform you are in, you need to make sure to use very specific measures. One of these measures that I use with bird ringing is I put this VLOOKUP. So I've got one folder with a list of names in there. I put a code in, and this code, the formula will then say, okay, I know this code, it's a Cape Sparrow. 820 is a red-headed finch. So when you start making graphs, there's a lot less mistakes that you can have. Another option is if we look here at sex, you can see there's 0, 1, 2. So here we've got a little table. I call it always my, we use it for a drop-down list or a lookup table. I've got the 0 to 4 that I use as codes. If I go into Excel and I put a 5 in there, I'll get this message stating it's an error. You have put the wrong number in. And in this way, it helps me to keep my database clean, and you do not need to spend hours fixing your Excel at the end. So this, if there's anything to learn, is understand how to use Excel and manage Excel to a great degree. The next part that is important is starting to look at naming conventions. People, especially if you become a data manager, people are sending you information in various formats. Today, luckily, you can use AI and you can say, please assist me create a folder structure. This example, I've got a folder structure that I use at work. So there is training. Inside my training folder, I've got a subfolder of admin, and you'll see my admin always starts with 01, because then I know admin is at the top of my folder structure. 02 will then follow. And then here when I get to resources, when I go into that folder, you'll see it's 2 point, or actually course content, it's 2.1. So for the study guide, lecture guide, and support documents. These really help you to find your documents at the end. Something else you could do is your naming of your folders or your files. You can have a project name that is always the same. Maybe there's a sub-project, like we did something about termites, and then this description can change all the time. So it's like loose text. And then in the end, you can put a date in there. So 2023-01-22. And in this way, you know, it was a project of Investec where we looked at termites, and we looked at termite toilet rolls in section B, and it was in 2023. And this is just little components, and you can put the date first, you can put the project name second, you can mix and match this, but it just helps you to sort and keep your data really to the point. Some of the platforms, JP mentioned Seymour, so which is South African, Earth Ranger. Now, Earth Ranger and SMART is what a lot of organizations were using, and they just brought out a notice that SMART and Earth Ranger is going to start working together more and more to become one platform. And this is really good news, because now 2 NGOs are working together to make a much better software for conservation. Then, those of you that know Esri, Esri is a very powerful software. It's got a lot of capabilities, but every time you add a capability, you need to pay for it. And the difference between Esri as a huge platform and Earth Ranger is Esri is a little bit more complex, or it can be a bit more complex to use in terms of setting up for conservation, where Earth Ranger is dedicated to conservation and helps you a lot easier to do what you need to do. So what do? We use Earth Ranger for training rangers here at the Wildlife College, and we also use it for security. And then Survey 123, Quick Capture, all of that for Esri, we use that more for biological data, to collect it, to work with it on platforms such as ArcGIS Pro. Let's have a quick look at how Earth Ranger looks like. This is the training center that they use. It's called Playground. And in this playground is Easter Island. We spoke about the geofence. So you can see this geofence is literally just a line on the ground. It follows there the edges of the land. And what it then does is, as something enters that line, you get an alert. And so there are various different alerts. Another thing that is nice, eBird. You can collect data from eBird or iNaturalist directly into your system. So when you collect something new, some new information, you can click on one of these buttons. It's adding an event. And then you'll get these events. So if it's a very important event, there's been an elephant poached now, you'll get it in red. Or in orange or amber, you can see, yeah, there's a pangolin. We want to know about it, but it's not that big of a risk. And maybe they saw some pollution. Well, the pollution, if it lies there today or tomorrow, it is not a life and death situation for us to go and collect it. Here is a good example. When we spoke about data integrity, if you look there, there's a little drop down. And this drop down helps you. If you click on it, every time Lantana is going to be spelled the right way. So which make the data management much easier. This block here at the bottom, you can see there's no drop down there, meaning people can type anything they like in there. And what then happens is what I showed you in that Excel example. There's only 2 colleges, but at the end you get 15 colleges because people are spelling it differently, putting different spaces in there. So it is important to have these things to create these drop downs, to create data integrity and a very structured way of data collection. When this happens, you can then make maps, like these heat maps, to see where did the boat patrol the most. You can ask questions. Why did the boat not patrol this area here? Maybe there's a reef and the boat cannot go there. Maybe there's a lot of wind. We do not know what is there until we then start talking to our rangers, our captains on the boat, and then ask them why they're not going there. And then this one is a helicopter that was flying around. You can see it's flying quite quickly, quite fast, and that's why these dots, these GPS points, are far away from one another. If your data is collected very well, there's a new tool that you can use. It's called Ecoscope. And Ecoscope is created by EarthRanger, and it's a out-of-the-box tool where you can analyze, say, people that were walking or the elephant that we saw earlier. And here we can see 90% of the time our elephant was here. In this area here, you can see, okay, at night there was a lot of movement, and during the day, the orange, there was a lot of movement as well. And the total distance that was moved over the period of which this report was run was about 2,200 kilometers. And this is important for your manager or the manager of the reserve to understand what is happening in the reserve. And there are different of these analyses that you can do. So what did we speak about? I think what was important is meaningful data collection starts with a good question. If you do not have the question, you cannot collect data that's going to help you. Data can be collected from GPS devices, sensors, smartphones, and you can even use satellites to collect spatial data, which is GPS data. We get software platforms like EarthRanger, Smart, and Esri that helps you to collect your data in a very structured way that you can analyze it a lot easier. Some of these platforms you need to pay for. Some of them, it's like a bursary where if you're a reserve, you're working for conservation, you can apply and then they'll assist you or give the software to you to use. Good data collection is important for good analysis. So I think at this stage, there's time for any questions, but before we get there, some of you were asking, and Diane, you were asking, so what now? I'm a student. I want to go further in conservation. Connected Conservation Foundation currently has a training course, a free training course online, where you can go and learn how to work with dishes, how to work with LoRa, even know what is LoRa. So have a look at it. It is for technicians in conservation. if you like technology, as technology is growing, we need people to look after the technology, the batteries, the solar panels, make sure it all works, that we've got good connectivity. So please go and have a look at this opportunity. Thanks a lot, Diane.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for a great opportunity. I believe we really gained, and you shared a lot. You shared some of interesting apps that I've been not seeing around, but I'm sure WTC students can be able to have gained a lot, either from Connect Conservation. I think I got it right. It's Connect Conservation app, yeah?
Connected, yes.
Yes. If you can share even the link probably in the chat, that way students can be able to access it, and even the rest of the audience.
I'll do
Yes,
that.
and thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think you touched really much on data accuracy and why data is really important. And I want to see if we do have some questions in the room. And in the meantime, there's a good message from Walter Liu, who said this was really a very powerful talk, and I want to say thank you. It's all because of Mr. Peter and JP in the room. It was really interesting to hear what is happening in technology, either on data correction, its accuracy, but also some systems that are variable. So this is the time for questions. I want to ask the audience, you can raise your hand using the reaction button. That way we can give you the floor to ask questions if you have any questions from WTC students, but even the rest of the audience online. Yes, Christine?
Thanks, Peter. That was a wonderful presentation. Peter, I saw in one of the slides, it showed data collection on lantana, which is obviously an invasive plant species. And I was just wondering, in the case of, it's just a topic that I'm interested in at the moment, in the case of invasive plant species management, how would you use, can you go through a little bit of a explanation of how you would use your conservation technology in the management of those invasive plants?
So I think what is important, thanks for the question, Kirsten. In conservation, the few things we do not have is a lot of money and a lot of resources, people. So what we need to do is look at how can we prioritize. And let's think a bit out of the box together, okay? We've got drone technology now where you can fly an area and most probably in the near future very accurately identify where all these lantanas are. Another way of doing is getting your rangers out, they start walking transects and they identify where lantana is. At the Wildlife College, we do not have a lot of lantana, but we get people out, they go and collect lantana locations, and then we take it out. And it helps us to go back every year to the same spot, because now we know where our problem areas are. We can go there, focus, and get it. In terms of with a drone and imagery, you can identify where's your biggest areas. And you start then with a strategy and say, okay, I'm going to start on top of the mountain. Or my other strategy is I'm going to start next to the river and start cleaning lantana there. As I clean, I map it then on a platform like Earth Ranger. I can see where my people have been walking because they did an alien patrol, for instance, an alien invasive removal patrol. They can then see where I've gone. And then next year, I can go back there and see how effective was it and do follow-ups. So it is not about removing aliens and chasing poachers. It's about being strategic in what we are doing. And that is what AI and technology in general is helping us to do.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And sure, the technology is doing more better than harm compared to what is being talked in the social space. But let's get another question from the audience. Please feel free to raise your hand and you unmute your microphone and get to ask your question. But in the meantime, people haven't asked the question. I wanted to ask about Connected Conservation Foundation app. Would you please come again on what they do and how would the students use it in their benefit?
Okay. There is technology is increasing a lot in conservation.
Mhm.
So everybody wants to fly a drone, but nobody thinks where the data is going to go. Everybody wants internet, but nobody thinks about where the internet comes from. So you need people to manage the internet. You need people to look after these networks. All of this is quite important in conservation. So we need people to make sure that the systems that technology is needing to run on, to make sure that that runs. And without those systems, it will not work. So I think, and that's the important part of it, is we do not have a lot of people that understand IT and conservation that are able to assist conservationists in spreading the information and getting it up and going.
And yes, and I think from what you're saying, what I have got is that even student needs to familiarize themselves with IT and anything aspect related to it, because studying wildlife management itself is not enough. But I think as the world is moving into a world that's being driven by technology, you will need to familiarize yourself with some of these technology systems and tools. That way you're able to adopt it in your daily work and makes it easy, like how JP and Peter has been showcasing with us and how they use it in their day-to-day work and how it's been making their life really good. And there's another beautiful message we have from Michelle Kahiga. Said two very insightful presentation, and I'm happy to have participated as a listener. And thank you so much, Michelle, as well. And we also have another, probably Mr. Peterson. If you can hear me, would you be okay to unmute yourself? He's the coordinator from Wildlife Tourism College. I think he might have one word or something to say to us.
Most importantly, with on how application of technology, especially in wildlife conservation, because most of our learners are involved in one way or another of a particular conservation area. And I think this is very insightful for them as they build their careers in their career starting. Thank you. Thanks, Peter, and here.
Yes. Thank you. Peterson is the academic coordinator from Wildlife Tourism College, and thank you so much, and thank you to your students. And we also have another message from Nadia Kengi. I will apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly. You bear with me. But they said thank you for the fantastic presentation and insights. Thank you to Nadia. And I think if there's no more questions, I don't know, both JP and Peter, if you have like a closing remarks for us, like a last word to our audience before we close, we call it to the end.
I think one important thing for me is do not get caught up in technology. And one of the users, Jackson, was asking me, why is it important to map user requirements before? We all see drones, we want a drone, and then we want a camera, and you can get so caught up in technology that you do not get to do your job. So do not get caught up in technology. Focus on what the job is. There are basics. Critical thinking is important, and that is what you need to focus on. AI will be there, it will be going, but AI cannot see what you are seeing in the bush. So it is something, it's a tool. You can use it, but critical thinking is important, and use it to help you. Do not let technology run your reserve. You run the reserve. AI and technology is only there to get you more information to run your reserve better. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. JP, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I share the same sentiment as Peter. Ultimately, it's the boots on the ground. It's the people that make the difference. And I think just everyone must remind themselves where we were 5 years ago with technology, where we were 10 years ago with technology, where we were 15 years ago with technology. Technology is evolving so fast that if you get focused in on one particular technology right now, it's not going to be long until the industry or the environment has gone past that technology, or that technology has increased or evolved. And new technologies are out there. So don't get locked into one thing. You need to keep your mind open and evolve with the change. But ultimately, it comes back to the people on the ground and who are the champions that are going to run that technology. You can have the best Earth Ranger setup, but if you don't have an administrator or an admin on that site that is making sure that it's running smoothly, it's not going to be any value to you. So it comes back down to the people at the end of the day. But it's amazing the technology that we have out there today that we can leverage in capabilities to make our jobs more efficient. And the stuff that we're able to see these days with technology is unreal. In my world in particular, in the anti-poaching world, the night work and some of the nocturnal stuff that we get to see is really amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, JP. And thank you also, Peter Hamming. He mentioned about use AI as a partner with whom we discuss ideas, not the source of information. That is definitely true. Let AI be your assistant or your advisor for discussion, not as a source of information. Accuracy at the end of the day comes to humans. At the end of the day, there's always what we can adjust and have accurate information. So, Christine, do you have something to say as a closing?
Deanne, I think you've done very well. I just want to say thank you so much, JP and Peter. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and we've all learned a lot from you. And hopefully we will work with you again in the future. So thank you for giving us your time and your wisdom. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you so much, Peter Hamming and JP, for the beautiful sources you shared with us in the chat box. Some interesting apps and new systems that we were not aware about, but I think we really learned a lot tonight. And I want to invite everyone in the room. Tomorrow we're going to have a continuity of digital system in conservation. Tomorrow we'll be with Mr. Craig Thomas, also taking us through some softwares that are used in conservation. So good night, and thank you everyone for joining us.